25 years ago, we started Idealab as a technology incubator. We modeled it after Edison Labs as a startup studio. We look for opportunities that are big and broken, and then brainstorm technology solutions to fix them. We started off with these first 12 ideas in 1996, and since then, we've had more than 5,000 ideas, started more than 150 companies, and had more than 50 successful IPOs and acquisitions. Here are my most valuable lessons learned. They're the things I wish someone had told me before I started Idealab. 25 lessons from 25 years of starting companies at Idealab. Challenge the status quo. I really feel it's very important to pick an idea that really makes a difference in the world. That makes it harder for sure, but it also in some ways improves your chances of success. By challenging the status quo, you're picking something that other people aren't doing right now. You're zigging where other people zag. At first, you might be ridiculed or even fail for having a great idea ahead of its time. But I really feel that all truth passes through 3 stages. This is a great quote by Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, first, an idea is ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and third, it's accepted as being self-evident. Well, when you first start out with your idea, if it is a bold new idea that challenges the status quo, you could be ridiculed. You're only opposed when the idea starts getting some traction, when people start feeling threatened by it. But if you push through those first 2 phases, and people then look back at what you did as being self-evident, then you have truly changed the world. You have caused something to come into being that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I think that is super valuable, super exciting, and a great basis to build a business upon. Find great timing. I found when I look back at the 150 companies we started over the years, that a much bigger factor in their success was the timing of the idea. Now, by definition, if you want to do something bold and new, you're probably going to be early because you want to be ahead of your time. But you don't want to be too far ahead of your time. You want to be a little bit ahead. And what do I mean by that? You need the world to be ready for what you're delivering. The things have to be in place to make it successful. It could be broadband penetration, it could be GPS adoption, it could be any other technology that you don't control, but which is necessary for your ideas to succeed. The world really has to be ready because you can't push people too hard against their will if the technologies aren't in place. One particular example I would give is in 2000, after we had a number of companies that were very successful in e-commerce, we were looking to figure out what would be the next industry that would really move online in a big way. And we figured it would be entertainment. And of course, being located right here in Los Angeles, entertainment capital of the world, we figured what a great thing to do next. We reached out to some celebrities. We got some great people signed up. We actually got Chris Rock and Adam Sandler signed up to build this great comedic entertainment company. The company was called Z.com. We raised capital. We started making great content. But broadband penetration was only at about 20%. So this great stuff that we made, you had to do all kinds of browser plugins to be able to watch those movies. It was very complex. We eventually didn't make it, but only a few years after we didn't make it, a whole bunch of things changed. Broadband penetration crossed 50%. People had moved from 9600 baud modems up to faster connections. The Flash plugin came out, which allowed people to be able to play movies inside their browser without downloading some other kind of crazy plugin to make it work. And all of a sudden, YouTube took advantage of that and took off like a rocket ship, and the world changed because everybody understood you could now watch video inside your browser. So we were off by just a few years, but we were off because we didn't understand that the threshold had to be crossed in the marketplace for us to be able to be successful. So when I look back on all of our ideas, I always thought that the idea mattered the most, and coming up with a great idea ahead of its time was crucial. I always thought the business plan really mattered. I thought that the business model mattered. How are you going to make money? I thought that the executive team and the work ethic really mattered. And of course, all those things matter. But timing really makes a very big difference because it can kill an otherwise great idea. Another example of timing, Uber came out right after the iPhone and was one of the first applications that really took advantage of GPS. All of a sudden, many people had GPS, and Uber almost wouldn't even work without GPS. But Uber also had unbelievable timing, again, that they didn't plan, but that we had just gone through a great recession, and many people were looking for extra money, so many people signed up to be drivers because there were a lot of people out of work. So two very fortuitous things happened to make that company take off like a rocket ship when it first started. So again, these are things that are outside of your own company's control, but as a startup, you really want to look at the timing and assess it very carefully. Are all the things in place to make your great new idea really be successful, especially the things that you can't control? Say no. This is very hard for an entrepreneur to do and very hard for me to do. So this is definitely one of those cases of do as I say, not as I do, although I try really, really hard to do this. It's very important, maybe more important, to say no to things and pay attention to that than what you say yes to. And here's why. As a startup, your time is so valuable and you're trying to compete against someone who's doing lots of things usually and has more resources than you. So figuring out what you can actually say no to, the opportunities you don't want to pursue, the countries you're not going to do business in, the people you're not going to work with, the opportunities you won't pursue, figuring out what those are and having it very clear so everybody in your company understands, that really can save you a whole bunch of heartache, a whole bunch of time, and really, really is important for entrepreneurial success. Again, this is very, very hard to do, but very, very valuable. Be success sensitive. Don't be dilution sensitive. This was a lesson that took me a very long time to learn, but I really learned that the outcome of your company is so digital. You can build a great, great big company, or you can fail. And there are, of course, in-betweens, but it's so valuable to find partners, investors, employees, everybody that is vested in your success. And I find the best way to do that is to give everybody high equity participation. I learned to not try and overthink fundraising games. It's just not worth it. I learned that as the founder and CEO, your goal is to set the strategy, do the great hiring, get the money in the bank, and keep the money in the bank. And definitely when you're choosing investors and partners, it's much more important to choose people who really agree with your mission, really buy into your mission, and really will be there for you in the long term, even if that's at a slightly lower valuation. And again, it's very painful to accept when you're actually in that valuation negotiation. But I have found from now doing so many different companies that the cases where I chose the partner who was more mission aligned over the higher valuation, it led to a greater chance of success. So I really would say be success sensitive, not dilution sensitive. Find product market fit. Product market fit is something which is very elusive, but extremely valuable. And you almost never get it right out of the gate. But you win or lose on customer delight. And that's what you achieve when you have product market fit. Sometimes it only takes a very small twist to take something from sort of snoozer to delight. But your job is to find it. Finding that is so, so valuable. The thing you're looking for in product market fit is pull from the customer rather than push. You don't have to beg them to take your product. They want more of it. One way to assess product market fit is what is the feeling of your customer if you told them you were taking your product away? If you can get more than 50% of your customers to be angry or unhappy if your product was no longer in their hands, then I think you're really onto something in the product market fit arena. The important thing about product market fit is you have to be very close to the customer to understand when you have it. I never thought I'd be giving business advice with a boxing quote from Mike Tyson, but he had an incredible quote which was relevant to boxing, but actually relevant here too, which is, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And I feel in business, you get punched in the face, metaphorically, by your customer when they don't feel product market fit, when they just feel blasé about what you're offering, when they don't feel angry if it was no longer existing. So your job is to constantly figure out what would it take to cause such delight in my customer that they would feel so mad if they no longer had your product. That means they're going to recommend it to other people. That means they're going to pull more of it from you. That means it's going to improve all of your aspects of doing business with your customer. And sometimes it's more valuable to even narrow your customer set, narrow your feature set, to get product market fit with a smaller group of people, but to have that strong feeling. That's how valuable product market fit is. become a great storyteller. Storyteller, is that really important for success in entrepreneurship? Well, it's much more important than I ever imagined. It's really, really important to perfect your story to both hire the best people, get the best investors, close your customers, motivate your team. You need a story that makes your business feel inevitable. It's a much bigger factor in success than I ever imagined because your story and your brand are what you use to move your company forward. When I was in college, I had to take a public speaking course, and I was terrified, absolutely terrified. Even though I was speaking to my friends about something that I knew very, very well. I happened to be building loudspeakers in college. I was just talking about my loudspeaker designs. So I was completely comfortable with the material, but I was terrified to stand up in front of the class and explain that to 20 of my peers. But that one class, Engineering Presentations, E10, was so valuable to me to get me over that fear and help me learn how important it was to communicate my thoughts. Now, I've learned in my career, every single business I start, I'm pitching my heart out. Again, I'm pitching it out all the time. Again, not just to investors, not just to business partners, but all the time. And I learn from every single one of those presentations. I recently had to give about 15 presentations on a company, and I saw how much better my presentation was the 15th time than the first time. And you should always be looking to get feedback and learn how to make your story sound better. Find out what didn't resonate, what didn't work, how can I make that make more sense? As you refine that, you will find you can get the best employees, the best team members, the best investors, best customers, just by making your story match your product and feel more inevitable and make the whole story make sense in a way that really, really changes the trajectory of your company. Be lean. You need to run a lean startup. There's a great book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup, and I really urge you to read that. But here's the basic premise. And I was doing this before I even heard the term lean startup, mostly because I didn't have the money to do otherwise. But it's really, really important to do even if you have the money. And that is to run your business with the scientific method, to have a hypothesis of what thing you want to learn, to develop the simplest experiment to test that hypothesis, to get feedback from that experiment, and then take that learning and have a new hypothesis. So what does that mean in practice? Well, one of our famous companies that grew to be more than $1 billion exit was Cars Direct. Cars Direct was built on the premise, this is back in 1998, it was built on my premise that people would buy a car sight unseen online, that people would give a $1,000 deposit to configure the car they wanted, place that, and have the car arrive at their house on a flatbed pickup truck with no interaction with a dealer whatsoever. Well, that was something that I personally wanted, but I didn't know if anybody else wanted it. And in fact, when I told it to other people, they laughed at me and said, no one's going to do that. Again, think back to 1998. There were some people who back then said, people won't even put their credit card online, let alone $1,000 as a deposit. But I knew that I really wanted that, and I wanted to see if other people wanted that. So I wanted to devise the simplest experiment to determine if that was a true statement. That was my hypothesis, that some people would do that. So we hired a CEO to build this idea. And that CEO started, and the goal was, in 90 days, let's go find a way to put up a website and see if anybody wants to do it. So I remember after about 30 days of getting the team together, getting it started, building the website, there weren't great tools for building websites back then. We had to build everything from scratch. I was asking them how they're doing, and they said, well, they're building the configurator, they're testing out how you choose the options of your car, and making sure you don't choose invalid options. And I was saying, don't worry about that. We don't even know if this is going to work. Don't build a configurator yet. You have to figure out all the options and all the car models out there. Let's just let people type in what they want, and we'll figure out in the back end if that's valid or not before we submit that to the car dealership. Then we worked on that for a while, and I came back another 30 days later, and they said, well, right now we're working on the source of supply. I'm talking to Ford and talking to Honda, figuring out, can we have a source of supply of cars? And I'm saying, why are we worrying about whether we have a source of supply of cars? We don't even know if we're going to do this idea yet. We just want to see if anybody would buy this. So finally, on something like the 80th day, they said, okay, we got it all ready. We're just going to let people type in they want. We don't have credit card approval yet, but I said, don't even worry about that. Let them type in their credit card. We won't even cash it. We just want to see if they would have put in their credit card to see if they would have done this. So I remember on a Thursday, we put the site live. I went home, I remember coming in on Friday morning and saying, well, how did it work? And they said, well, we sold 4 cars last night. I said, hurry up and turn the site off. The reason was, all we were gonna do was go down to the auto mall in Monrovia and buy the cars and deliver them in a flatbed truck and lose probably $1,000 or $2,000 per car. So now we're gonna lose $8,000 for those 4 orders. But we learned the critical thing. For only $8,000, without the development of all the back end and all the stuff we had to do and securing source and supply, we found the answer to the critical hypothesis question, which is people would put their credit card in online to configure a card that they wanted and buy it sight unseen for a fixed price. That was gold. With that gold, we then really set out to build the whole company. We delivered those 4 cars to test out the experience, make sure they were happy. But then we went out and went to build a website, and the website took off like crazy. This was really, really revolutionary. Not everybody wanted to do it, but enough people wanted to do it that the company went public, grew to more than $1 billion valuation, and continues to this day in many, many areas as part of internet brands. But the critical thing there was, how do we learn that critical thing in a very lean method? Well, every company can do that. You really need to think about, how can I learn the most, maybe sometimes without even writing a line of code, if code wasn't involved. Now, in some cases, it's very hard to be very lean, but it's always possible to figure out, how can I spend the least possible to get the most critical learning? And the reason for that is, that's how a startup wins, by outlearning their bigger competition. Your bigger competition has more money than you. Your bigger competition has more brand than you. Your bigger competition has more resources than you. But you can outlearn them by doing more tighter iterations with a great hypothesis at each step. When you make hypotheses and you don't get the answer that you want, you try a new one. And eventually, if you've tried too many and you get nowhere, then maybe that's time that you need to pivot or do something different. But the ability to take these small experiments and make great learning is the essence of being lean, and it's exactly what a startup can do to beat a much bigger Goliath competitor. Be remarkable. Be remarkable. This is my conclusion from a great quote by Jonathan Cohn, which is, advertising is a tax on being unremarkable. You need to find a way to make your offering exceptional. You need to find a way to make your offering stand out. Why is that so important? It is very expensive to advertise and convince someone to buy your product. Very often, the amount you have to advertise to convince someone to buy a product is an amount larger than the profit you can make on that product. And therefore, you can't make that up in volume. That's a negative return that you can't recover from. The way you recover from that is to make your product so remarkable that it either doesn't need advertising, or the amount of advertising nudge that you need to push someone over the edge is in fact much less than the profit you can make on something. So therefore, looking very carefully at your offering, at how you explain it, and how you make it appear remarkable and actually be remarkable is very, very crucial in success of a business. Try again. Be willing to learn and repeat. I had a few companies that I started that didn't make it, and I was very sad about them. But I pretty much had vowed to never go back and try a company like those again, because I had failed at them. And then I went to a conference where Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, was speaking. And he was talking about how LinkedIn, I think, was something like his 4th social network. He had tried one and it didn't work. He tried a second one a different way and it didn't work, but he was really passionate about social networks. He thought they were very important. Tried a third one, it didn't work, and he finally had the right angle with LinkedIn. He had the right idea on how to build virality with your phone book and your contacts. He had the right value proposition and maybe the right timing. And I was very inspired by that talk where he talked about each one of these tries as an at-bat. He thought of it like, if you strike out in an at-bat, you don't never play baseball again. You try and assess what happened with that pitching, what did I swing at that I shouldn't have swung at, and how can I go back and have another at-bat and do a better job. I never really thought about the companies that I was starting as at-bats, but listening to it that way really made me think about, well, if some of those companies that I was really passionate about didn't make it, but if I go back and take another at-bat, but with a new stance, literally like an at-bat with a different angle, and with learning, and possibly with new timing, could I make a go of it again? And I actually went back and took a look at 2 companies of ours that didn't make it, but that I was very, very passionate about. Actually, 3 companies. And I started them again Different names, different people, different products, but the same basic areas. And of those 3 companies, one of them failed, but 2 of them became wild successes and are growing today. And I'm so glad that I heard that Reid Hoffman talk to give me the confidence to actually go back and take a lesson from what I had learned as opposed to giving up from the thing that I had learned. And one other way of looking at it was, I once had an advisor and CEO coach who was talking to me in a prior company before I started Idealab called Knowledge Adventure. And we had just lost some money on some project. I think we had lost $2 million on a very expensive, painful lesson. And he was giving me advice about it and said, Bill, you just took a $2 million class. Are you going to attend that class or are you going to skip that class? If you learn from everything that you just did, you can turn that into much, much more than what you paid for that class. And I really think that that applies to everything in business. Business really is a journey, and you have to take into account everything you've learned along the way to really make something better and better each time, and that you really should be willing to try again. Be willing to learn, rinse, and repeat. Build a complementary team. You need to have diversity of thought in your company, but in addition to diversity of thought, diversity of people, you need diversity of styles. You need people who look at the world in different ways and have different viewpoints from their outset. I learned this very late. I was probably 35 years old before I learned this, because up until then I was hiring all people like myself. I would go and try and find people that I went to school with or other people who I liked at work, really to try and build up a company of people like me. But then I finally reached a breaking point when I learned you needed to have other styles. In fact, other people that maybe I didn't get along with, but I had to learn how to have mutual trust and respect for those other styles to get the best out of the company. So let me explain 4 caricatures of people. No people are exactly these 4 caricatures, but they all have varying amounts of these 4 things I'm going to call letters. E, P, A, and I. E is the entrepreneur, P is the producer, A is the administrator, and I is the integrator. Now, I learned these things from a great CEO coach named Ichak Adizes, and he has a great book called Corporate Life Cycles, where he talks about the life cycle of a company and how you need these different skills at different stages of a company. But to be successful as a company, to be in prime, you need all of them. So let me give you an example. A company always starts out with E, the entrepreneur. The E is the dreamer, the E has the idea, and the entrepreneur is the only person who can start the company. The E gets the company going, and if you look at time on this axis and success on this, it's going to go up and up and up and up to the right, but eventually it will fail if the E never can get any P. And by P, I mean producer. If it can't produce a product, if it can't ship a product, if it can't make some revenues. Now an E person like myself, can also have a P skill, also can have the ability to get something done. But often, the E needs to bring in other P talent to be successful. Then the company can go further. But eventually, even with E and P, a company will start to break at the seams if it doesn't bring in some A. The A skill is the administrative skill. It's the ability to pay the bills, pay the rent, put the money in the bank account, keep the trains running on time, put all the systems in place to keep the E and the P running properly. And then finally, even with A, eventually a company will fall apart at the seams if it doesn't bring in some I, the integrator skill. Why does the company need I? Well, the A, the E, and the P don't necessarily get along. In the extreme, they would hate each other's guts because they're just completely different mindsets. You think about the different mindsets of those people. So you need an I skill that can help resolve conflict, that can help bring those people together, that can make sure that there's mutual trust and respect between those 3 other personality types. But I'll give you a specific example that can give some color to that. Imagine we're together in this room with 4 extreme of those caricatures. And the 4 of us are all in a conference room and we're talking, and then one of us notices over on the window over there's some dirt on the window. Well, let me tell you about the different ways that those 4 people would look at it. The P, and this will help you identify which kind of person you are. The P would look at that and say, boy, right after this meeting's over, we got to go clean that window. I don't like that over there. The A would look at that and say, I see something wrong with the window over there. Let me make up a form for everything that's wrong in the company. We'll put them in order and we'll go back through them in chronological order until they're all solved. The E would look at it and say, look at that parking lot outside across that window there. I wonder what we're going to put over there. So the E doesn't even see the scratch, the dirt in the window, anything, sees through the window, is looking to the future, looking over the mountains to figure out what's next. And the I looks at that dirt on the window and says, I wonder what those three people are thinking. The I is more concerned about the other people than about the window, the process, any of that. So think about how different people look at the exact same thing from those different angles, and how you want to have all those views in your company, and want to have all those views in your company working in harmony. It is very hard to achieve, but it is very valuable to achieve. And it was eye-opening to me to realize that that was even something possible to achieve. Now, when I start a company, I really think about the roles and the desires of people. Even when I'm hiring people, I'm looking at what skill they have and what skill they want to have and what role they want to have in the company, and make sure that that is filling a deficiency of the company or not overloading on something that the company already has too much of. Because again, the most important thing is to have all four of those traits in beautiful harmony. That is building a perfect complementary team. Be persistent. The emotional journey of creating anything great often comes with a dark swamp of despair in the middle, a chasm that you need to cross that feels uncrossable at times. But understanding that that is there is very, very valuable. Even the greatest of entrepreneurs had that chasm in front of them. Steve Jobs getting fired from Apple, Next not working out, coming back to Apple, being weeks away from being out of cash, having Hail Mary financing from Microsoft to keep them alive. Incredible things. There were many, many dark swamps of despair for Steve Jobs. Even Walt Disney. He mortgaged everything to make Snow White the first full-length animated feature. He mortgaged everything to make Disneyland happen in 1955. There were dark swamps of despair for almost every great entrepreneur. And across many companies that I've started, I've seen this. And the companies that fight to persevere to cross that dark swamp lead to great, great success. So I really urge you to understand that that's going to be part of it, and that really is an important crossing of the chasm for every great startup. Protect your IP. It is very important for a startup to have something novel and something protectable. So think through about what's novel about your solution. Look even for obvious angles, but things that no one's tried before. And then you can go ahead and protect it very inexpensively, starting with provisional patents, maybe turning into full patents later. But it's really valuable, even as an exercise, to think through all the things that could be differentiated and special about what you're doing. It's going to be useful for recruiting, it's going to be useful for fundraising, and it might be very, very useful for growing your business and protecting yourself later. I'm even thinking about this from the standpoint of never ever having to take anybody to court over your IP, but I'm just thinking about making your core offering stronger and the thought process that goes into thinking about that differentiation. So building up your IP portfolio, whether it's protected with patents or even just keeping it trade secrets, but really spending time to think that through and always think that through. I love having IP brainstorming sessions with my team to assess what have we done recently that's new and novel that no one has tried before. And even just collecting it among ourselves, but then often filing it as provisionals is a very, very valuable exercise. Ignore downturns. Downturns are very frustrating times for entrepreneurs, but they're actually great times for entrepreneurship. 2001, after the dot-com crash, 2009, after the Great Recession, they were actually great times to start companies. Why were they great times to start companies? First, there's less competition. Many people are scared away by the downturn. Second, during these downturns, usually the only things that actually go down are valuations. But what's actually going up are users, usage, dollars spent. All those things, for example, continued to skyrocket through the dot-com crash, but the only thing that crashed were valuations. So taking advantage of the momentum that was coming through that period was extremely valuable, and there were some seminal companies created both in the dot-com crash and right after the recession. So I think you should be focused on the customer demand, the customer opportunity, and not worry about the specific economic climate. Of course, it might be harder to raise capital, but again, as I talked about in one of my other lessons, don't be dilution sensitive, be success sensitive. Get the capital you need, and very often you can be even more successful starting a company in a downturn than in good times. Use Moore's Law. Exponential curves crush linear. Nothing has ever gone down as much in price or as fast as the cost of computing power. And businesses that can smartly harness this effect will win. Look carefully at your business opportunity and see if there's some way to embed more computation in than your competitors, because the computation is going to approach free. And if you can embed more computation, although that might take a lot of software development to execute the first time, each incremental time it will be almost free. And every year as you progress, that cost will go down. So you will have the wind at your back of decreasing computation costs to help make your business even more competitive than someone who isn't embracing that. So I feel that using Moore's Law can be a great competitive weapon in your business arsenal. Iterate like crazy. You never get it perfect right out of the gate. Your first and best idea is just step one, but you find gold by adapting to what you learn from your customers. You win by iteration, by getting the most learning per unit time. In fact, looking back on the history of Idealab and now 150 companies, I realize I probably even shouldn't have called it Idealab. I should have called it Iterate Lab. I was in love with the idea. I always thought the idea was the essence, but in fact, the idea really is just the starting point. Making small changes, making those adjustments, being adaptable is probably more important than even the quality of the idea on day one. And that's why iterate like crazy is one of those valuable things you can do to make your business successful. Be frugal. It is very important to take the money you have and make it last as long as possible. You need to spend your money on your product and on your customers. Saving money on your surroundings and all the things that don't drive product market fit are the most valuable thing you can do. Here's a picture of Jeff Bezos in 1999 at his little desk, door as a desk, after he went public. This is in 1999, after Amazon was already a public company. And look how frugal that company was being. It's even more important as a startup, long before you go public, to adapt that attitude. It's very, very hard after you've raised a lot of money to still act frugally, but it's very, very important to build that culture into your company. It's very, very crucial for success to always have that be a critical part of the DNA of your business. Find your purpose. It's very important to figure out what you are uniquely great at and where you have a special competitive advantage and where you have a special heart-driven desire. Your purpose and your passion are what's necessary to carry you through the tough times. And every startup is going to have tough times. So your passion is not so important for your success because you're going to be better at what you're doing because you're passionate. Your passion is important because that's what's going to keep you going when you have those dark days, which inevitably every startup has. So finding your purpose, really understanding it, articulating it, knowing why you're doing what you're doing is very crucial to your startup success. Culture eats strategy. Peter Drucker had a famous quote in business that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What does he mean by that? It means that you can have the best strategy in the world to take your company or your idea forward, but if the culture of the company is different or distinct from what the strategy is, that's going to win. And that means that the culture really, really is important. So how do you affect that? How do you change that? How do you do something about that? Well, it's very important that everybody in your company agree on a culture. It's very important for the CEO to articulate what culture you want to have. I think it's best to have that culture derived as a group by having everybody participate. But however you derive it, whether it's solo coming from the CEO at the top or whether it's a group effort to determine it, it's very important that everybody understands what the culture is. And one thing that's incredible is that the CEO, founder, might have their culture very clearly articulated in their own head, but everybody else in the company can't articulate it. And think about how that applies even to all the daily interactions of people in the company. You want people to be able to make decisions like you would if you want everybody to share the same culture. Well, how do you get people to know what that is? Only through a lot of repetition, a lot of discussion, and a lot of sharing, a lot of scenario playing of what to do in different situations so that people can make smart decisions. I really think that if you spend a lot of time talking about the culture of your company and listening and taking input from others and making sure you all agree on it, then you can have a situation where the strategy that you want to carry out in your company can actually be executed because the culture will help make that succeed as opposed to getting in its way. Have laser focus. Focus is how you, as a startup, can take on a bigger competitor. You can have a narrower focus and outdo a competitor by specializing in one particular area. Now, choosing that focus is very hard and very scary. I know as an entrepreneur, I often want to try more things or keep more opportunities open because it feels like that's safer. It's almost like hedging your bets by having more balls in the air or more chances for revenue to come in or more chances to win the customer. But in fact, it's the opposite of that. I learned that the very hard way. In one of my companies, Knowledge Adventure, I learned that as I continued to narrow the focus, the company did better and better. We did better and better because we could win against that customer base more successfully, but also by saying no to things that we weren't as good at, the company succeeded more and more. It was a very difficult lesson to learn, but a very valuable lesson to learn. It's always hard to choose the right focus, but what I learned from that experience and others was that if you have a choice between three things that you're choosing between, it's even better to pick an inferior one than to try and do all three of them. That even the wrong focus is better than being unfocused. And that was something that was very surprising for me to learn, very hard to believe, but I really feel strongly that having laser focus is the key way that a startup with less resources can take on a much better resourced competitor. Make investors money. One of the things I've learned is that it's very important to make investors money, and it's for more reasons than you might think. Of course, you want to be fair to your investors. Of course, you want to be able to work with people again in the future. But another thing I've learned, if you're really focused on making a deal with investors that's truly win-win, so that you show that you really care about how things turn out for them, that will be a really powerful way to actually close your investment and to build a great partnership that's really going to work great for you in the long term. So it's really important to always be thinking about making a great return for your investors, as well as for making a return for yourself and all of your employees. Be a learning machine. It's important to always be improving, always be learning, always be looking for feedback. Entrepreneurship is really hard, and you can't be good at everything, but you can improve upon your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses. One outlook that I've used is called close the gap. When I think about a skill that I wish I had and look at where I'm lacking, rather than the way I used to think about it, which was, oh, I'm not very good at that, I now think about it as a gap. There's a gap between where I am and where I want to be. And how about if I just close that gap? Maybe even just a little bit at first, but then keep on learning, keep on closing a little bit more over time until the gap is closed. It's hard, but a different and powerful way to think about it, as something that you can chip away at over time, as opposed to a chasm that you can't cross. That has made it easier for me. As a company, you always want to have your company learning, but as a person, you always want to be a learning machine for yourself as well. Always be fundraising. This might sound silly or even wrong, but what I mean by it is that you as an entrepreneur should always be thinking about improving your story, making sure that you use that to get the capital you need to achieve your long-term objectives. And also that closing a round of financing does not mean that it's over. It just means that it's enough for the next hill. Even after you close a round of financing, you should be thinking about your next step in growth. You should be thinking about, how do I tell my story better? What do I now need to do next? And always be meeting people that could be helping you for that next round. Be transparent. I have found that transparency wins, but that it comes at a cost of extra care. By sharing more about your successes and failures internally, by being more open book about your finances, and really about everything, you will have a team that can make better decisions, and you can scale your organization beyond yourself. The price you pay is that you have to earn the trust of others, and you have to take the time to explain all the ramifications to everybody. That takes more effort. But the ROI on that effort is high, as now you have people who know the facts and can act more smartly on their own, and also feel more empowered and more like owners. The more every person in your company feels like an owner, the more you can unlock human potential from every corner of your organization, and that leads to dramatically higher success. Ignore sunk costs. I think that to succeed in business, you have to be very adaptive. You have to have what I call low inertia. You have to be able to change direction with new but validated information. It's very hard to do because we have this built-in, tremendous sunk cost fallacy. It makes us want to adhere to a given direction, even in light of new contradictory evidence. However, when you have that new evidence, you should listen to it. You should ignore those sunk costs. You should just agree that those costs were the valuable learning to get to this current place and move forward with the new information. Embrace diversity. Inclusive, diverse teams win. There's a really great talk and great book by Francis Frey that I love that says this even better than I can here, but I'll take a stab. Think about a Venn diagram with 3 circles. A homogeneous team will give you one overlapping circle the same size as all 3 circles on top of one another. A diverse team spreads out that circle into 3 separate ones, but if not inclusive, only includes the small overlapping triangle in the center of those 3 circles. But a diverse team that is inclusive gives you the sum of the area of all 3 circles, or the broadest set of knowledge and ideas. So it's not good enough to just have broad ideas or diversity. You need to build an organization that truly is inclusive of and listens to all those ideas to get the best outcome. Companies that build a culture like this will be unstoppable, and it's extremely worthwhile to put tremendous effort into building an inclusive and diverse team. I have learned so much over the last 25 years at Idealab, and I'm so grateful for all the people who work with me and taught me all these lessons. I hope these lessons that I've shared with you today are really helpful to you. I'd love your feedback. I look forward to finding ways to work together, and best of luck in your entrepreneurial endeavors.